What's up, family? Welcome back to the channel. As you all know, this has been an incredibly busy week, but hey, it's Thursday. It's time to get another video out. So here we are. Before I jump in, make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. Um, you know, uh, Consider joining our community, whether you're on Patreon, Discord, YouTube membership program. We're doing game night on Discord now every 2 weeks. It's super duper cool. Did our first one last week, and we have merch. So check that out. It's pretty dope. So last night I was on the Hang Up with Matt Dillahunty, had just an amazing time. And there were two calls in particular that inspired this video. And so I literally just had to interrupt my rotation to kind of talk about this a little bit because there were two themes from last night that really stuck out to me. And that was the idea of morality and the idea of logic. The morality was basically from this call that we had where a young man called in and was trying to tell us that God loves us as a father. And we kind of walked him through how this God doesn't really seem to be that loving of a father. But even though morality wasn't the subject of that conversation, you could see very clearly that he was having trouble being able to call his own self good and recognize that what God was doing is, or what God is not doing, rather, would be bad. And this is ultimately a morality issue. So I wanted to talk about morality, but then also logic, because we did have another caller who just very abrasively asserted that atheists cannot be logical because logic has to come from some type of higher authority or some type of higher standard of truth, which that's just all mucky muck. That's word gumbo. When you hear people doing stuff like that, it's word gumbo. And the problem is, many times when dealing with people like that, the problem that they're having is that they are assuming, because they have not defined these words or wrestled with the definitions of these words, that no one else has either. So they think when they say a higher truth, you are somehow changing the definition of truth, and you're not. So truth is still truth. So it became apparent to me that so many people, which I already kind of knew about the morality side, but there's so many people believe that logic and morality flow from the divine. So I'd like to talk about how critical thinking actually informs these areas. I've honestly been shocked by how many people embrace the idea that logic or morality has to flow from God. As even when I was a pastor, that's not something that I attached to my belief system. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this video. But first, let's start with a few key concepts to help platform this conversation. And some of you will be familiar with some of these concepts. Some of you may not be. But we'll start here, and that's science as a basis for morality. Since we're going to start with morality, science as a basis for morality, as opposed to insert your God or your deity or your magical sky pimp, whatever, and as a basis for morality, right? So science as a basis for morality. The scientific understanding of human behavior and psychology can lead to an objective basis for determining what actions are morally right or wrong by observing their effects on human well-being. And I almost want to use a tactic that the believers often use and say, like, you first have to believe that we can get that the scientific understanding of human behavior can lead to an objective basis. But anyway, that's more like just kind of tongue in cheek. But then also, so there's science as a basis for morality, but the next concept that'll be important for this conversation is well-being as a moral objective. And that's actions leading to the well-being of individuals and communities are morally good, while those causing harm are morally bad. And I know for some this may seem like either super controversial or super new, but to me, I think that part is something that we all learned as children, because that's when you start developing your morality. You don't start developing your morality in Sunday school. You don't start developing your morality in elementary school. You don't start developing your morality in when you're old enough to participate in church stuff. No, you start developing your morality as soon as you get here, your sense of what it is. And so, oftentimes just looking at, for those of you who have children, just looking at how your children interact with the world around them and how they learn lessons, or how they learn lessons in this world. Because our children learn lessons that we don't teach them. So where are they learning those lessons from? They're not learning those lessons from God. Yeah, well, they're not learning those lessons from God. They're learning those lessons from their experience, from their experiences, and then how they feel about those experiences. And so, if I keep hitting my brother, if I keep hitting my brother and my sister is not going to want to play with me. And then I'm going to have that feeling of nobody wants to play with me. And then that feeling gets connected to the behavior of hitting or not hitting my brother and sister. And ultimately, this very simplified way of how we start wrestling with morality at a very young age, and it's how we start learning how to value the comfort of others, almost in a way of preservation for ourselves, which we'll get into. Another concept is the critique of moral relativism. And moral relativism is the idea that morality is subjective and varies between cultures or individuals. And that's pretty much where I spent the majority of my life at. I spent, even as a believer. And that's what I say, when I hear people who are believers and they're saying that, no, morality is objective and it flows from God. Again, like I didn't put morality in the realm of God. Morality to me was human, and so it was just something that humans had. God, in my view, God was amoral, without morals, didn't need them. He lives beyond the world of morals, but yeah, but anyway, that's where I lived. I lived in this world where morality was relative, and I think because that may have been, I conflated morality with legality, because legality really is relative, but because and that might be the thing, like I know, at least for many of us in this country, we're just now getting to the place where we're willing to separate morality from legality, so that maybe we can get better legal systems, because many of our laws have been based on these ideas of morality, many of them have been steeped in religious superstition, and then we codified them into law, and so then legality and morality, or law and morals, became very hard to discern, very, very hard to separate. So yeah, that is interesting. That is interesting. That's gonna be on my mind now. All right. So, but just as there are truths to be known about the physical world, there are truths about what actions are likely to improve or harm well-being, which can be understood through science. And then this last concept, before we actually jump into our discussion, is the interchangeability of perspectives, which is understanding and empathizing with the experiences of others, which can inform our ethical decisions, a process that doesn't require religious input but can be informed by empathy and understanding, developed through psychological insights. Again, which is kind of like that process I just highlighted with our kids. Our kids kind of go through those interchangeabilities. What hurts you doesn't have to hurt me. It just has to, if the consequence is going to be something I don't like, which means I don't get to play with you later, then I can perceive hurting you as hurting me. So the well-being of you is and for the well-being of me. So to kind of platform this discussion further, let's jump into this. So let's talk about, because basically my viewpoint here, what I'm discussing, is that morality, logic, no God needed for either one of these things. So I want to talk about the nature of moral reasoning. So, and that is, my view is that morality does have a rational foundation. Morality can be seen as a system of rational principles aimed at promoting well-being and minimizing harm. Of course, philosophers like Immanuel Kant have argued that moral laws can be derived from rationality itself through categorical imperatives that are universal and binding, regardless of personal desires or divine commands. And then also that moral principles are often evaluated based on their universal applicability. This suggests that actions are right or wrong based on their coherence with principles that everyone could consistently follow, rather than being based on subjective or supernatural directives. Which I do find that argument to be um, disingenuous, because no one that I know is actually getting their morals from God. You know what I'm saying? And I only really see people do that when they're trying to be petty, pedantic, childish, asinine, those type of things. But other than that, I haven't met anyone who really lives this worldview where God defines my morals. Um, Number one, because God would really have to exist for that to happen. So at best, you have, ancient Bronze Age civilizations define my morals. And that's a big yikes. Like, yikes. You know what? That's a full on Yahtzee. Yeah, yeah, that's where that goes. Okay, so, but also when it comes to morality, it's important to consider the evolutionary and sociological perspectives, which I enjoy combining those perspectives. The more we learn, it's always amazing to me, and there is a term for this, but it's escaping me. It's not necessarily a mirror, but it's almost like a mirror. But like biology gives us insight into sociology. And so I love studying evolutionary sociology. So evolutionary biology obviously is how we evolved as biological beings, but evolutionary sociology, or sociological evolution, yeah, evolutionary sociology would be the study of how we evolved as societies. And there are some very interesting parallels to how we evolve, biologically. Now, of course, it's not absolutely linear, nor is it absolutely symmetrical, in that sense. But it still is fascinating, because sociology, uh, much like many of the attributes of psychology, is an emergent experience. It's an emergent property. There's nothing about our biology that dictates our sociology, but our sociology emerges our out of our biological habits and behaviors. And so it's just fascinating. Forgive me for nerding out a little bit. All right, so studies in evolutionary biology suggest that many moral behaviors have roots in evolutionary changes. Behaviors like cooperation and altruism can be explained by their roles in enhancing group survival, and have been observed in other social animals, not just humans. And, so they're not, you know, especially, and of course, not for all Christian believers, but for a good group of Christian believers. The moment you demonstrate that something is also present in animals, you kind of, you're pulling at the thread there, because then at that moment, most of your belief system is that you are uniquely made in the image of God, and the proof that you are uniquely made in the image of God is that you have all of these type of things that you call divine, which all just tend to be emotional. But you have all of these emotional things that you have concluded without investigation that animals do not have, and therefore man is uniquely made, or humanity is uniquely made in the image of God. But then once you begin to demonstrate that, oh no, other animals have these things, and it's so funny, because the when you look at just the history of claims, we tend to make claims before we investigate, and you would think that would be a habit we'd be stopping right now. But that's one of those places that we still kind of play around with. Um, but yeah, so it's also present in other animals. Um, and then the diversity of moral systems across different cultures and times, which this does sort of speak to moral relativism, but only moral relative. This is more so moral variance than moral relativism, because moral relativism would argue that all moralities are valid regardless of well-being if they're approved by the culture. And I'd say moral variance just argues that people have different approaches in different ways that they feel about morality, regardless of its veracity. You know, so but the diversity of moral systems across different cultures and times does suggest that morality adapts to specific social, economic, and environmental contexts, rather than emanating from a single, unchanging supernatural force. And of course, to me, this is one of the most easiest arguments to make of how we know that at least as far as how we know that humans have not gotten their morality from God, is because our morality changes with the information that we know. And if we were just connected to the source of all information, then our morality just would have been right from day one. And it wasn't. It has evolved as we have evolved in the same way that, bam, humans didn't show up, with just being humans one day. Our morality didn't show up that way either, nor did our sciences. And that's, I think that's still some of the bathwater of that creationism. That's some of the bathwater of creationism. That we'll just leave it there. This idea that no, things were created, and so it's just like morality is a fixed point, and it's like no, nothing is a fixed point. I don't even think we found anything standing still in this entire universe yet. And I say entire universe as if we only have as if we had more access than more than 5% of it. So it's not a lot. But even in that 5%, I don't think we found anything standing still yet. So there just really are no fixed points when it comes to stuff like that. But the fact that morality has the fact that there even is an argument for moral relativism, which of course I'm reframing now more so in the idea of moral variance. The fact that this phenomenon even exists would demonstrate pretty much conclusively that morality is not attached to any supernatural state of affairs, but morality is a natural response to our natural state of affairs. And so like and again, this is just really building on the concept of moral progress, changes in moral beliefs and practices that better promote human flourishing, challenges the notion that morality is fixed by divine command. As societies evolve, their moral understandings develop in response to changes in knowledge, living conditions, and social structures. And of course, the ability to critique and reform moral ideas based on outcomes and reasoned arguments further supports the view that morality is independent of the supernatural. Social reforms like the abolition of slavery and the expansion of civil rights have often been opposed by prevailing religious doctrine and communities, which I've highlighted in my videos, but were driven by secular ethical reasoning and humanitarian concerns. Right? And then, of course, even when dealing with theories, there you have ideals, ethical theories such as consequentialism, which this philosophy, particularly utilitarianism, proposes that the morality of an action is determined by its outcomes. The focus is on maximizing overall happiness and well-being, independent of religious beliefs. And I think one of the reasons we struggle with this is because we have a profound misunderstanding of well-being and happiness, particularly still due to our bathwater situation of being, born in bullshit. And so, we still have these caricature of ideas, such as original sin, or being inherently bad, or being inherently unworthy, or being inherently dangerous, being inherently just problematic. And so, therefore, when we think about morality on a framework as something that looks for ways to get the best for people for whatever reason, we can be extremely averse. And I say for whatever reason, but I just gave what I think is the reason. And then, of course, virtue ethics. Originating with Aristotle, virtue ethics focuses on character and the virtues that constitute a good life. And this approach is more about the development of good moral character rather than adherence to externally imposed laws, supernatural or not. And so, like, one of the reasons I'm highlighting this stuff is, again, because I say even when I was a believer, it was not my idea that morality somehow flowed from God. And a part of that reason is because this isn't a new conversation. This isn't exactly a new revelation. It seemed that we as a species discovered that like centuries ago and had no problem with still keeping God, in context. I'm absolutely flabbergasted by that. Like I think ideas like this only exist because of apologists. Because like it's when we talk about logic, you'll kind of see what I mean. All right, and then humanism provides a framework for morality that centers on human needs and rational interests, advocating for ethical principles based on the capacity to meet human needs and enhance life quality. And not only that, and I know humanism gets its slack, and it only gets its slack when people get caught up on this is the second time using this word in this video, but like pedantic stuff, like um so for me, my humanism doesn't mean that I only care about humans. Though I do believe that, or I do, I guess predict would be a better word. Predict is that humanism will lead us to things beyond that, post-humanism, transhumanism, I don't know. Um, but will lead us to things beyond that. Um, Dang it, where was I going there? Something with humanism. Oh, will lead us to things beyond that. But I think, for people to think that, for people to conflate human exceptionalism with humanism, I think is a mistake. But I can understand why you would do so. You know what I'm saying? It's like people conflating black power of the '60s with white power of the Ku Klux Klan. I get that these words sound alike and these phrases sound alike, but they were given birth to in two differently entire contexts. One, these people were claiming white power when they already had the power. Black power was a claim to get power that they didn't have. And that's a simple one. Obviously, we can go deeper down that rabbit trail. But the biggest point here is that, to me, it is my humanism that allows me, and again, like I'm sure there's going to be a better word for it, but I don't think just because the word is humanism, we should say that humanism is only focused on humans, because it's not. The majority of the humanists I know, it is through their humanism that they are also getting a greater appreciation for the other species on this planet, and for this planet itself, because we are not an island. And this goes back to, it ties in perfectly with the morality argument in itself, because the reason we care for these things is because we need them to exist. You see? And so so that's why I'd say I don't find the word humanism to be exclusive from the idea of caring for animals and caring for the trees, and caring for planets, and caring for black holes and white dwarfs. That reminds me of a hip hop song, but I'm not going to go there right now. But yeah, so I think we can move on because I'm dropping hip hop references. But humanism does provide a framework for understanding morality, and embrace and engaging it. The emphasis on individual moral autonomy and ethical decision making underscores the belief that individuals are capable of making moral decisions without reference to supernatural authorities. Morality, when viewed through the lens of philosophy, sociology, and biology, shows robust capacities for being for development independent of supernatural beliefs. Ethical systems that rely on rational evaluation, empirical outcomes, and universal principles of fairness and harm reduction can provide a solid foundation for moral thought and action. This approach not only respects the diversity of human experiences, but also encourages ongoing moral progress as our understanding of the world and each other deepens. And then, of course, the biggest thing that I do, and I know it's not probably not the best argument, but it's the argument I make because the worldview that I live in. If I believe that there is no God, then it's impossible for morality to flow from God anyway. So, you know, and so and I say that that's not a bad faith argument. It's a good faith argument because that's the position that typically the believer is taking. The believer is taking what is assumed is that there is a God. And so, why do you think we have morality? We have morality because there's this God. But if I remove that assumption, when that assumption is a claim that has not been verified, and I replace it with the opposite of what has been verified, so that since that has not been verified, let's say that has not been verified, then let's see, can we find morality? Can we find how we get here? And so that's kind of what we just did there. All right, so now let's talk about logic. And I thought this one was odd because I guess I would have understood. I guess I would have understood logic as distinctly human when I was a pastor, which is why it would have been insufficient to understand God. Understand God. Logic would have been within the domain of humanity. It would have been a lesser tool of humanity, something that humanity has created that is completely insufficient and incapable of actually understanding the deeper things of God. To move logic into the realm of God, which is where many early believers actually did based on the Greek concept of logos, is to move God back into the realm of the natural. And the idea of natural gods is actually much older than the idea of supernatural gods, and is still quite prevalent in ideologies such as pantheism. Natural gods are gods that are perceived as a part of the natural world, as gods emerged as a personification of the natural, not the supernatural. Supernaturalism typically comes in when the natural world falls out of alignment with what we hoped it to be, and yet we still want it to be there. And so then that's when you start creating meta natural narratives to kind of support your original hypothesis. Your original hypothesis would have been natural, you know. So when humans first believed that there was a God in control of the storms, they were believing in a natural God, right? That God was a personification of a natural event. It's once we come to the place where we can actually discover that there is no God behind that natural event, but we still want to hold on to the idea or the possibility that there could be, is when we move from the phenomenon of having natural gods to having supernatural gods. And everybody didn't take that same transitions. Some people move from natural gods to no gods at all, which is move from natural gods to nature, you know, because the God was the presumption, it was the assumption, it was the fear, it was the scary face in the window until you got close enough to figure out it was just a fucking tree. You know, that's, or at least that's how I view the evolution of religion, or supernaturalism more so. All right, so back to logic. All right, so logic is a system of reasoning designed to understand the principles of valid inference and demonstration. It is concerned with what follows from what and whether conclusions are justified by premises. If any of you grew up in the 80s and 90s, then you likely remember seeing a lot of cartoons, or it may not even been cartoons, I think like puppet stuff back then, but a bunch of children's shows that were aimed, I don't know why we still don't do this, but that were aimed at teaching logic, you know, so pattern recognition and things of that nature. Um, the rules of logic are objective, meaning they're not contingent upon personal beliefs or supernatural interventions. They are based on inherent relationships between statements that dictate whether conclusions logically follow from premises. And again, this is why I actually thought this was odd, because the argument of many believers is that you cannot logically prove God, that God does not exist in the realm of logic. And that's why I've always, again, even when I was a pastor, logic and God did not, they couldn't coexist. When I did start bringing those things together, and that, it was my decision to say, you know, if God is real, God has to be true, and so God has to be the truth. And that's when I started using logic to interrogate my faith. And then I was like, oh, yikes. All right. So, but yeah, logic is based on inherent relationships. I want to say cause and effect, but, you know, not quite, but sort of, you know. Um, Logical principles are universal. They do not change based on one's religious belief or lack thereof. For example, the law of non contradiction: a statement cannot be both true and false in the same sense at the same time. This holds regardless of religious doctrine. You know, again, that's why I found that one to just be very odd. Logic is applied across various fields, from mathematics and science to philosophy and law, demonstrating its functionality independent of any religion or supernatural context. And I mean, like that's the thing. Like saying that as an atheist you can't be logical is like saying as an atheist you can't be mathematical. Like I don't understand where people, and it's really, to be clear, obviously logic is not what they're using when they make these statements. This is really like, I'm really mad at you that you're not on my bandwagon. And so because you're not on my bandwagon, you can't enjoy life, and that's really all they're trying to do. They're literally trying to straw man you into not enjoying life, saying no, you can't enjoy life because you're not on my bandwagon. There's no way you can be moral if you're not on my bandwagon. There's no way you can be logical if you're not on my bandwagon, which I don't even think those arguments are even attractive because they have no utility in a sense. Because you can say that I'm not capable of being logical all day, but you can't stop me from being logical. In the same way that I can't stop you from being delusional. About this. I'm not saying you're delusional about everything, but hey, we all have delusions in some areas. I've been accused of having delusions of grandeur a few times in my life. But also just the development of formal logic by figures such as Aristotle was based on observations of language, argument structure, and the need for consistency in reasoning. These developments occurred independently of any divine revelation or supernatural influence. And again, to me, when people make these claims like logic and morality comes from God, the only thing that they're revealing is that you've never studied these things. It's like the same person that there's still people on this planet who still believe that rain comes from God, and the only way to actually have that belief that rain comes from God is for you to have never studied the water cycle. You know what I'm saying? Precipitation, condensation, and some other Asians up in there. You know what I'm saying? There's some other Asians. I can't remember them right now. I almost feel like I'm saying Haitians, but and the proper way to pronounce that is Haitians. But hey, what do I know? Um, and so yeah, it's like no, logic has a history. We know how we got here. Morality has a history. We know how we got here. I think one of the biggest disingenuous things about believers of all types is the pretending that things can't be known that we absolutely already know. Like, no, this isn't mysterious, guy. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know where you were when we all stopped and got ice cream, but we all stopped together. So get your ice cream cone, man. But over centuries, advancements in logic have been driven by intellectual inquiry and philosophical debate, not by theological or supernatural considerations. Innovations in symbolic logic and computational theories further illustrate logic's grounding in secular intellectual traditions. Logic and theology address different or address. Some people say different domains of knowledge. I don't consider theology a domain of knowledge because theology is knowledge of God. And as we've seen, nobody has demonstrated any knowledge of God. So there is no theology until we actually define God into something, you know? And so theology used to be used to address the questions of morality, purpose. We've defined that was the con that the theologians telling you where morality came from didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. That the theologians who were telling you how to heal yourself didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. I think I talked about that in a recent video as well. But so now we understand these things, and logic in the same manner strictly deals with the validity of argument structure, irresponsive of the content's spiritual significance. And I just realized why I would have never made the vocal argument that God and logic were in the same domain. I did believe that, okay, I believe that God was separate from logic and God was better than logic. And the thoughts that God gave me were separate from logic. That's weird, right? It's all bullshit, so it's gonna be weird. Um, and so logical truths stand on their own without needing justification from supernatural sources. Their validity does not depend on the existence or non-existence of supernatural entities. Logical processes are founded on human reasoning capabilities. They evolved through decades, through not decades. They evolved through debate, experimentation, and mathematical proofs rather than revelation or religious experience. Revelation, that's the word that I was looking for earlier. It's revelation. That's where I lived. I lived in revelation, not logic. Many logical principles are supported by empirical evidence in scientific and practical context, reinforcing their validity without recourse to supernatural explanations. And of course, logic is taught as a critical thinking tool that enhances clarity and argumentative precision. Its teaching does not require or assume any religious beliefs, underscoring its secular utility, which means you don't have to pray to be logical. You don't have to pray to understand how logic works. God doesn't have to give you a special gift. You can be a Satanist and understand logic. Well, let's go somewhere different, because Satanists are often atheists. So let's use Luciferian. You could be a Luciferian. There it is, Luciferian. Luciferianism. Yep. You can be a Luciferian, which means you worship Lucifer, and logic will still work for you because it's a tool, you know. And as long as you have the capacity to use the tool, you can use the tool. And I think morality should be viewed in the same way, that it is a tool. And it's a tool that we all have the capacity to use, which actually empathy would be the tool that would use that gets us to morality. But then also just critical thinking itself, it's being able to think past the short term, because that's sometimes the things that kills our empathy, is that we can't think deeper than the moment, Okay, I'm going to get into a whole nother conversation if I don't reel this in. So, big thing about logic is logic operates independently of religious or supernatural beliefs. Its principles are derived from human understanding and the intrinsic nature of reasoning, making it a fundamental tool for secular discourse and analysis. This independence is crucial for maintaining objectivity and universality in logical applications, ensuring that it remains a vital tool for intellectual exploration and debate across different cultures and belief systems. And for me, those are the two things for anything for me. For anything to be objective, well, I'm going to go further than that. For anything to be significant for me, it needs to be universally applicable, which means it doesn't change. you know, Universally applicable. That's its universality. Everywhere, so gravity works everywhere I go on this planet. That's significant for me. But there also has to be some utility. So when people tell me that God's morality is better, or that God is the author of morality, if I actually adopted this belief, if I adopted the belief that God is the author of morality, or that God is the author of logic, how does that in any way change the way that I actually engage with morality or logic? If I can come to the conclusion that killing other people is wrong without God, and we do have societies that did not have Jehovah that also came to the conclusion that killing other people is bad, then what's the utility of believing that a God said it first? You see, like it to me, I've always been very averse to pedantic arguments. Okay, that's the third time I've used that word in this video. But I've always just been very averse to that. Like I don't like arguments that are just because. And so it's just like, no, logic has to come from God. Okay, so if I agreed with you and said yes, how would that change your life and how would it change mine? Like, what would be the utility of our agreement? Why do you need me to agree with you on this? Which is all, it's odd to me. That's my number one question to most people, because honestly, I really don't give a fuck about what most people think, and that's just me being honest. Not in a dismissive, uncaring way, just in an unmoved way. Like, I'm not moved by it. If you think things that are untrue, I can't stop you from thinking those things, and I'm not really gonna try to, because then that would kind of make me a jackass. Unless you invited me in your life for that particular reason, you reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have these questions and I want somebody to kind of rub this the wrong way with me to see if I can figure out where I stand." And I'd love to be that person. But I always find these type of things to be very interesting, because morality seems to be an obvious one to me. I don't know. And I don't think I'm special in that way. Just as a parent, morality seems to be obvious. And then logic, we have the history. I don't understand. But so there's my little TED talk today on how, there is no God needed for logic or morality. And atheists, as well as theists, have the capacity to be logical, as we've seen. And they both have the capacity to be illogical. Isn't that amazing that theists believe that that only people who have God can be logical, but they don't believe that God can't stop his people from being illogical. I'm telling you, God's powers get weirder and weaker the more you actually interrogate it. All right, so thank you for hanging out with me today. I appreciate y'all so much. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. Um, Hit that alert notification bell. Oh, consider joining our community, man. We're on Patreon, Discord, YouTube, all them good places. And check out our merch because it's dope. All right, I think that's all I got for now. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful. I'll holla.